You know, when an earthquake hits or a tsunami warning blares, it's easy to feel completely powerless against nature. But what if I told you that our survival isn't really about fighting nature, but about having a smart, continuous plan? Today, we're going to break down the framework that communities use not just to survive, but to recover and actually build back stronger than before. All right, let's get into it. So here's our game plan. We'll start by looking the problem right in the eye. Then we'll unpack this powerful four-stage cycle. That's the real core of our explainer today. We're going to cover the proactive steps and the reactive ones, see how it all connects, and then we'll wrap up by asking a pretty important question. Are we really ready for this? Okay, first things first, we have to accept that some things are just way beyond our control. I mean, we live on a pretty dynamic planet, right? So tectonic hazards, things like earthquakes, they're just part of the deal. They're unavoidable. But, and this is a huge but, unavoidable does not mean we have to be unprepared. And that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? We can't stop the Earth from moving, no way. But we absolutely, 100%, have power over how we prepare for it, and maybe even more importantly, how we bounce back. This is where human smarts and planning really come into play. So, how do we actually do that? Well, there's this really powerful concept called the hazard management cycle. And listen, this is not just some boring checklist. You got to think of it like a continuous flowing blueprint, a loop that communities all over the world depend on to handle disasters. So let's get a proper definition up here. It's a continuous framework. And that word continuous is literally everything. This isn't a straight line where you finish one step and you're done. No, it's a loop. The end of one disaster's recovery actually informs how we prepare for the next one. It's all about constantly learning and building our resilience. And here they are, the four key stages that make up this whole thing: mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. I like to call it the resilience loop. Each part is its own thing, for sure, but they all feed into each other. So let's break down that first half of the cycle, shall we? This is what I call the before phase. This is all the work we do before disaster even thinks about striking. And honestly, being proactive like this is probably the most important part of the entire cycle. Because the work you do here, it saves lives and it saves a ton of money down the road. Now, you might hear these two words, mitigation and preparedness, and think they're the same thing. They're not. Mitigation is the long game. It's trying to stop a hazard from turning into a total disaster in the first place. Preparedness, on the other hand, is all about being ready to act when that disaster does hit. So one is about softening the punch, and the other is about knowing how to take it. So what does mitigation actually look like in the real world? Well, it's the stuff that's often invisible, but it's so important. We're talking about building codes that let skyscrapers sway instead of snapping, seawalls that stand guard against tsunamis. It's about making smart, sometimes tough decisions about where not to build. It's really the foundational strength of a community. And what about preparedness? Well, this is the human side of the whole deal. This is where we come in. It's the emergency plan stuck to your fridge door. It's the tsunami siren test you hear every month. It's those earthquake drills we all did in school. It's having that stockpile of water and food ready to go. This part is all about knowledge and being ready to move. But look, no matter how well we prepare, sometimes the disaster just hits. And when it does, we have to pivot. We move out of that proactive phase and into the reactive one: response and recovery. The response phase, this is what most of us picture when we think of a disaster. It's those first critical hours and days right after it happens. It's the search and rescue teams pulling people from the rubble, the paramedics, the firefighters, all of those immediate life-or-death actions focused on saving lives right then and there. Once that immediate chaos subsides, the long road to recovery begins. And this timeline shows it perfectly. It is not a quick fix. In the short term, days and weeks, it's about getting the power back on, getting clean water flowing, providing temporary shelter, the basics. But long-term recovery, wow, that can take years, sometimes decades. It's the massive task of rebuilding not just buildings, but whole economies and people's lives. So we've got these four stages, right? Mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. Here's the most crucial part. They are not separate boxes. They are links in a chain. And the strength of that entire chain of resilience depends on every single link. Which, of course, brings us to a pretty scary question. What happens if a link snaps? If our mitigation is weak or our preparedness is just not there, what does that do to the whole system? Well, here's your answer. It's a domino effect, plain and simple. A failure in one stage dumps a massive, overwhelming burden onto the next one. If you don't invest in stronger buildings, that's weak mitigation, your hospitals are going to be completely swamped during the response. And your recovery? It's going to be incredibly slow and astronomically expensive. Every dollar you don't spend on prevention can easily turn into $10 or even $100 in recovery costs. And this brings us to something called the resilience gap. This table lays it out pretty clearly, showing why some nations are just so much more vulnerable than others. A lot of the time, it boils down to resources and governance. Developed nations have the money to invest heavily in mitigation and have really advanced infrastructure. Meanwhile, developing nations often struggle with limited funds and have a tougher time getting these measures in place, which can make every single link in their chain feel a bit more fragile. So after looking at this whole cycle, this entire framework, and all the challenges, we kind of have to turn that question on ourselves, don't we? But I want to end this on a really hopeful note because there absolutely is one. This quote, it gets right to the very heart of the resilience loop. The toughest, most painful part of the cycle, recovery, is also our single greatest opportunity. It's our chance to learn from everything that went wrong, to rebuild smarter, and to make that chain of resilience even stronger for the next time. It's how we evolve. And so I'll leave you with this question. Just think about where you live. Think about those 4 stages we talked about: mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. How strong are those links in your own community? Because at the end of the day, the strength of that loop, it doesn't just determine how we survive. It determines how well we thrive.